Good afternoon and greetings from London. My name is Anastasia Vanavskaya, and on behalf of Atuda, I would like to welcome you all to the luxury edition of our Travel and Hospitality webinar series. Well, dare say each of our events is a luxury one, but this edition is also dedicated specifically to the luxury segment in hospitality. COVID-19 has changed many things, but some remain unaffected. Arguably, among them is people's appreciation of luxury. What they qualify as luxury is evolving, however. To remain relevant and capitalize on these changes, luxury brands need to follow very closely the nuances of shifting attitudes, priorities, and preferences of their clientele. The uniqueness of our event today lies in the fact that there is hardly any body of work out there on how luxury and hospitality is defined, perceived, and achieved in the time of a global pandemic and its aftermath. Therefore, I hope you will make the most of the information and insights that our panelists will be sharing with us. I will now introduce them very briefly and then, as is traditional for our webinars, ask them to say a few words about themselves and what they have done work-wise so far today before joining us here. So, we have the pleasure of the company of Tim Cordon, Senior Vice President for Middle East and Africa at Radisson Hotel Group, Alex Dichter, Senior Partner and Global Travel Practice Leader at McKinsey & Company, and Willemijn Geels, Vice President Development Europe from IGG Hotels and Resorts. Tim, would you like to say a few words about yourself and, given it is 7 p.m. in Dubai, how your day at work went today?
Thanks very much. Good to be here. Yes, I head up Radisson Hotel Group for the Middle East and Africa. I've been working in hotels pretty much my whole life since I was around 15 or 16 years old. Always loved the business and still do. I guess in my working life today, it's been the usual combination of meetings, a lunch with an owner, and then back to the office for clearing the decks. I guess pretty similar to everybody. I'm fortunate that I'm based in Dubai in some ways, that Dubai is a little bit more open at this time, so I'm able to go out for lunch, I'm able to host meetings, at least small ones, and it feels somehow a little bit more normal. So I'm pleased for that.
Wonderful. Alex, your day has just started, but your career in the industry is quite extensive. Tell us a bit about both.
Sure. I've been in the travel industry in one way, shape, or another my entire life. I started out airline pilot, largely irrelevant to this conversation. 8 years at Continental Airlines, McKinsey for 22, and all of that time in the travel space. And I think, as is likely true for all of us here, this is a sector that if it happens to be your job, it tends also to be your passion. And both my choice, but also the design of my work. I'm an enormous consumer of travel. Prior to COVID, I typically flew 800,000 physical miles per year. I spent 3 nights a week on a plane, and really enjoyed it. And that probably leads to my day, which is normal these days, was abnormal before. But what have I been doing? I've been on video conferences all day. I started at 4 o'clock in the morning, and I'm still going. And that's probably the hardest part of COVID, is I have a very global role, and strangely, it was easier to get on a plane, fly into another time zone, and live in that time zone than it is to have calls at 3 o'clock in the morning and 4 o'clock in the morning, which is more normal these days. But anyway, that's me.
Thank you, Alex. Well, I guess change is a constant these days, and we have to get used to new things. Willemijn, please tell us a few words about what you do and how your day has been so far.
Sure. So I'm heading up the Europe development team for IHG. I've been with the company 7 years, but also all my career in hospitality and tourism. I started to work in hotels pretty early on, and then moved onto the consulting side. So I've been working quite a bit in consulting and transactional services. And then made the move actually to a hotel operating company, because I did want it to get a bit more involved and follow through with the project. So really super excited to be on the development side. As far as my day is concerned, here in Europe, it's still pretty difficult with COVID environment, so everything is closed. As you can see, I'm actually in the office, which is a little bit exceptional because I've been mainly working from home. And I had a physical client meeting this morning, which was brilliant. So quite happy with that. Hopefully we can soon go back to having more meetings, because I think we all miss the human contact and actually physically meeting people. So fingers crossed.
Absolutely, Willemijn. You are the lucky one compared to us here in London. We don't have that yet, but hopefully sometime soon. Well, with this variety of experiences and expertise, our conversation today is bound to answer all the questions we have on our agenda. This is also a good moment to mention to our audience that they can put their own questions to our panel via Ask a Question feature at the bottom of the screen. We will look to pick this up at the end. Well, back to our questions, and the first one is very simple. What is luxury today, and has the concept changed over the course of the COVID-19 crisis? Alex, would you like to start on this one?
Sure. I mean, I think it's worth noting that the definition of luxury has remained constant for as long as humans have been on Earth, and that's that you are experiencing something that is significantly better than your day-to-day life. And unfortunately, that means that luxury is relative. If you have a 100-foot yacht, luxury is a 200-foot yacht. And I think if there is a change, and by the way, I think it's a change that was well underway prior to COVID, it's embedded in what I think is one of the most enduring consumer shifts on the planet, and that's the shift of spending on things to spending on experiences. And I think we see that in hospitality, that luxury 20 years ago was champagne and caviar. And of course, today, champagne and caviar are available at Costco and at relatively low prices in some cases. And if you really want those things, they're widely available. What are less available are experiences. And I think increasingly luxury travel brands are recognizing that. And it's not to say that the champagne isn't there if you want it, but that the real markers of luxury, of removing ourselves from our day-to-day lives, are often marked by memorable experiences. And of course, this is anchored by our psychology. Things tend not to make us happy. They break, they fade. The glass of champagne doesn't last in our memory for very long. Experiences tend to gain in our memories. And so I think that COVID has been a catalyst. We have been locked in our homes for the better part of a year, surrounded by our things, which are doing very little for us. But we've been robbed of our experiences. And I think we will see even more of this trend as we come back, as people seek to experience the world in different ways. And so I think that's a call to action for all luxury brands to start thinking about how we engage people in how they spend their time, not just what we give to them.
Absolutely. Can't agree more, Alex. Willemijn, what about you? Would you agree on that? And what is your understanding of luxury?
True. I agree to a large extent with what just has been said. I think luxury today, it becomes more about indeed experiences, and it becomes also a lot about disconnecting from the daily life, right? From our super busy life where you're constantly with the technology, we're all looking at the screen a bigger part of the day, especially now in the COVID world. So what we see is a strong trend coming through is people really want to disconnect from that. And luxury is sort of spending quality time with the family, with friends, with your partner, and disconnecting from all of that. I think that's a big thing that we will see accelerating in the coming years, and it will happen as soon as people can travel again. This whole trend of going into nature, going into a very remote place where you have the luxury of the space, of the experience, the service, and you really have the time for yourself. So it's about a disconnect, and then there's a large element about well-being. I think we talk about that later as well. It's a huge focus on finding that balance, right? Your personal balance and well-being, because between the busy professional life and the personal life. And I think that is the true luxury is to just sort of get away, having those experiences. And it can take different shape depending on where you travel, with whom you travel. Obviously, the brands that we represent in IG in our luxury portfolio also give a different interpretation to that in various ways. Whether you're traveling in an intercontinental hotel, it may be more classical, or in a Kimpton, where it's a more funny, funky, interesting experience. Will depend, obviously, on the brands and how each of the brands interpret that sense of luxury. And I think those two trends are clearly very strong.
So true. There are very many facets to luxury. And Tim, has Radisson's approach to luxury been going through any changes?
Yeah, I fully agree with what Alex and Willemijn have said. The COVID has only been a catalyst for change and accelerated trends that we knew existed before, and that's very much into experiences, absolutely, rather than buying things. So from our point of view, it's about trying to provide those experiences, and in any hotel, whatever scale or brand you're at, it's about the team that's in the hotel. They're the ones that provide those experiences and tend to be the most precious asset that a hotel has. So for us, luxury has become a couple of things. Firstly, how do you provide experiences that money can't buy? It's an easily thrown around tagline, but it is something that if you're embedded in the community or the locality of wherever you're operating your business, you probably can do. You can provide something that a tourist just can't get if they just turn up and ask for it themselves. That's one thing that we've explored in a very sort of significant way, as I'm sure everybody here is. The other thing is, and Alex touched on it, for the last 12 months, we haven't been traveling, and we haven't seen family and friends, and we haven't been able to make those personal connections, whether that's with business colleagues or close family, whatever it is. And that becomes a very high priority for people. And that becomes then luxury. How do I have an experience with my family? Because those friends that I haven't seen in a year, because that time is all of a sudden more precious because I'm not able to do it as often as I used to be able to. So how do you provide a service around that as well? So they're the sort of questions we've been looking at to answer the sort of new trends in luxury.
Interesting you touched on that, Tim. I think there's that element of, traveling that you see a little bit of a shift there with family, especially. I think there's more and more, I think they call it intergenerational travel or something like that, where basically you maybe used to go away with the partner. Well, now we actually may take, the kids along and the grandparents along to really catch up all that time that we didn't have in the past year. Which is also something we need to take into account as hotel companies when we design hotels, how we operate hotels, how we cater to a group of people made up of different generations with different needs in a luxury environment.
Yeah, you're right. And I think that extends further because more than ever, families are spread over the world. It used to be that families were spread over a few cities in a country or even just a small locality. But now it's very international. So it's not unusual to have your parents living in one country and and your brother and sister all over the place. So that travel for meeting becomes a very important part of what luxury means to people. So that's something we've explored quite a bit. And just touching on what you said earlier, I think, Willemijn, is that different type of travel as well has become more luxurious. So we've seen a lot more demand for safari products, for example, in Africa. And I think that is a trend, again, that's perhaps accelerated, or eco-tourism, so going off the beaten track to find experiences that, frankly, no one else in your circle has been able to put onto Instagram yet. It's become sort of the luxury as well. Debate whether that's a good thing or not, but certainly it's a trend we've seen.
A fantastic discussion we're having here, and I'm so pleased with the number of ideas we're coming up with in terms of what the luxury is today. And now let's proceed to a question of geographical market performance. Alex, maybe you could give us a more global view, and then Tim and Willemijn will follow with the market assessment of the geographical locations they are responsible for.
Sure. First of all, I mean, we're seeing interest in luxury from around the world. And I think one of the things that marks today's industry is that income is not necessarily a barrier to luxury and perhaps even to spending a reasonable amount of money on luxury. And again, I think in line with this trend and shift from things to experiences, people are willing and excited to pay real money for experiences that feel special. I have seen resorts with average daily rates north of $1,000 a night, where if you double click and look at the profile of the average guest, you'd see incomes of between $70,000 and $100,000 a year, which in today's world is sort of squarely middle class. And by the way, these people are reporting back that they felt that they got absolute fantastic value for their money. So I wouldn't necessarily just look to the rich part of the world. We see in virtually every market an emerging middle class with disposable income. And if we ask people what they want to spend that income on, travel is typically the #1 item on the list. That said, I do think we have some parts of the world with particular demographic tailwinds, because to really experience travel, you need both time and money. And if we were to look at Europe and North Asia, that's Korea and Japan, roughly 95+% of the consumption growth that we will see in the economy over the course of the next 10 years will come from people who today are over 55. And so, these are people with money and with time. And by the way, their kids in those economies have significantly less money and significantly less time. In the US, that number looks more like 60%. The baby boomers are coming into their own and are going to be traveling with all of the time that they have. And so I think those are very much areas to watch. China is inverted. The money is in the hands of the younger generation. They don't necessarily have the time, and yet they really want to travel. So we see short booking windows, but a lot of interest in travel. And as they age and have more time on their hands, we will see them traveling more.
Thank you, Alex. Very comprehensive global overview. Tim, what can you say about the market performance within your portfolio?
Well, the discrete market performance, I suppose, I'd like to broaden it slightly and say in more emerging markets, we've seen a more resilient performance in 2020 or in the last 12 months than we have in more developed markets. And that's been led by a couple of different things. Partly it's demographic, more youthful populations. In the Middle East and Africa, that's certainly true. And partly it's, let's say, assessment of risk with COVID-19 is quite a different perception compared to your reality. And the third thing that's different is the lack of, let's say, strong government payroll protection plans or employment protection plans. So what that's meant is that businesses kind of have to keep on going, because the alternative is, well, it becomes an existential crisis. So because there's no other way to maintain that business or maintain that employment and put food on people's tables and keep the economy going. So whilst there's been lockdowns, they've been somehow less intense and less well policed in some cases, not all, but in some cases. And what that's meant is that whilst we saw revenue collapse this time last year, as we did globally everywhere, we've seen a steady recovery pretty much since then, beginning slowly and then gradually building on that. And we haven't seen a second or third wave dip in income that we've seen in more developed markets. And the comments I'm making are true of, although different timescales when the pandemic hit, are true of Middle East and Africa broadly, but also what we see in Russia, what we see in India. China's a little bit ahead of the curve. So if we classify some of those as more developing markets, we've seen a more robust economic recovery, or more sustainable economic recovery. And now, as I sit in Dubai, I mean, hotel occupancies have had to be capped at 70% because for COVID reasons. And the fact that all hotels are running at 69% occupancy tells you broadly what the level of business activity is in this part of the world right now.
Yeah, that's not, unfortunately, not quite the case for my region yet. I'm slightly jealous of the numbers you mentioned there, Tim, but we'll get there. Now, talking about Europe, which is my patch, obviously, maybe stating the obvious, but we have seen that leisure destinations resisted pretty well over the course of the last year. and continue to do so. So surprisingly, July, August last year, whilst we were in the middle of the crisis, leisure destinations and our leisure-orientated hotels have done really, really well, which again shows to, I think, goes to show how people want to travel, how people will continue to travel as soon as they get the opportunity and as soon as the lifting of regulations allow for it. So when we look at sort of development and where we are growing and where we want to continue to grow, this is one of the axes that we're actively pursuing at IHG as well, which again is not due to COVID, but I think COVID has been an accelerator and a catalyst into this trend because we had already taken that strategic decision to move from purely being very much focused on the big capital cities with our luxury brands to going more to resort destinations with Intercon, with Kimpton. Six Senses always was very much positioned on the resort and wellness segment, so to say, but we will continue that. So just give an example, in the last year, we signed a Kimpton in Mallorca, we signed an Intercontinental in France, in the French Alps, we signed also Intercontinental in Rome. So equally, I would say, between the larger capital cities, but also more destinations which are leisure oriented, or at least you have a mix of business and leisure. So we're looking at things in Venice, in Montenegro, in Algarve, in Courchevel, I mean, you name it. There's quite a bit more leisure-oriented destinations than there would have been typically before on our development wish list. And then obviously we're looking to find selectively those destinations which have high RevPAR and would say probably least seasonality possible, to make it for a most sustainable business model for our owners.
Thank you, Willemijn. New markets are very exciting, and so are new age groups of customers entering the luxury segment. How do you relate to them and win over their interest and loyalty? Tim, would you like to start on that, please?
Yeah, you just broke up a second there. We talking about the younger generation entering, yeah.
About younger generation entering the market, and how do you win over their interest, their loyalty, how do you engage with them?
Yeah. That's a good question. I'm of the opinion that the trends we've talked about already are just as relevant to a younger generation as they are to an older generation. I think it's a little bit of a misconception that we believe millennials all want to have, I don't know, an iPad when they check in or something. I don't think that's the case. They still want to have, perhaps even more so, an off the beaten track, out of this world experience that they somehow weren't able to have in their day-to-day life. So I don't think the trends are too different. Now, the product that those people are looking for or might engage with may be more lifestyle than traditional luxury. So that maybe is a trend, but again, it depends very much on the individual and where they're coming from. If I look at the performance in some of our brands, for example, we see young, wealthy, the emerging middle class out of China staying in the most luxurious brands that we have in traditional luxury, whereas we see more developed markets, millennial travelers staying in lifestyle hotels. So there's a space for everybody to be able to operate with the more youthful travelers that are coming through. And that is the future, of course, of our business. It is where the growth is going to come from. And the huge middle classes that are coming out of markets you've already talked about, Alex. But differentiating experience, yes, there are subtleties, but overall, I think they're looking for quite a similar package, if you like.
Thank you, Tim. Willemijn, would you like to build on that?
Yeah, I would. I think one of the trends maybe that we start seeing when the younger generation is concerned, other than being super sensitive to Instagram and all these really great looking visuals, and it's becoming more and more important. And as a developer, it was funny because we went on site the other day to visit a potential hotel building, and there was this little window, and basically you could see the Eiffel Tower. So, and the first thing my commercial VP said, oh, this is an Instagrammable suite or an Instagrammable room, so it's good. So that is a trend. It's becoming really, really important, to get your experience and share your experience. But the other thing I would say, I think what is getting really highlighted with the younger generation is the sustainability element. We looked in quite some data on that, because for IG it's super important as well. We're very much attached to doing the right thing and developing sustainably and operating sustainably. But if you look at the 18-24, any category under 30, they're actually willing to pay more for sustainable travel. They're more likely to support brands which have a strong environmental and social commitment than brands that have not. And I think this is something we start to see now in the recent years. We always thought it would be important, but the numbers really start to show it. So I think for companies, it's more than ever important to have those commitments, to communicate on them, and really live by them and walk the walk, so to say. Because that is one thing that these type of customers are much more sensitive to, and I think they'll really make their buying decisions and their brand choices partly on that.
Great. Just to build on that a little bit, one of the audience members asked to be a bit more specific when we speak about the younger generation. I think that's good advice, but I think the sort of current focus of many travel companies as they think about the younger generation is probably the trailing edge of the millennial generation. And I think broadly speaking, we are overreacting, and we're overreacting for a couple of reasons. Some of which have already been said. I think first of all, again, the demographics say that largely this is a generation with less money than their parents. And so if we were to be designing bespoke brands for anyone, it ought to be for people, my age and older. Second, I think in general, when big businesses run by executives who are, our age and older, try to establish brands to tap into cultural themes among younger people, inevitably we fail. Remember that part of what any younger generation is doing, and this has always been the case, is rebelling and choosing things in a deliberately different way than their parents did. And it's very hard to get these right from a sort of corporate down kind of model. I recall these boxy vehicles that many car companies came out with probably 10 years or so ago, responding to the notion that millennials seem to like quirky cars. And they bought none of them. They were all bought by their parents, who said, oh, look, there's more space for my groceries. And the brands existed here and there, but they didn't achieve what they were trying to achieve. All that said, I do think that with every generation, there come a set of attitudes that turn out to be universal. And they end up being contagious. Their parents end up adopting them, and they become very much norms. And so, the focus on sustainability, as an example, I think a focus on experiences over things, more likely to trust recommendations from friends through social media than necessarily formal review guides. Remember when we all read photos to try to figure out where we were going to stay in a given city? I think very few of us do that anymore. We mostly rely on other people's comments. And importantly, I think we're also seeing a shift, perhaps driven by millennials, of a focus and a value on authenticity over consistency. In that, early hotel brands, not that early, but hotel brands that were common, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, part of the value proposition was that you could go into this, a hotel in any part of the world, within a brand portfolio, close your eyes, and find the light switch, that they were really very, very similar. And of course, now people are looking for there to be some local character, and perhaps Airbnb ushered that along to some extent. But we're certainly seeing soft brand portfolios among hotels pick up on that. And I think it's a very exciting trend. It makes travel more interesting. And while it might be an attitude sparked by millennials, it's one that's been largely adopted by their parents.
Yeah, quite right. Fully agree with everything you said there. It's a very interesting topic. But there's another question here where I just wanted to touch on quickly, because it says, I would like to think luxury is what you won't normally do because of COVID-19, but is safety is important in luxury. Yes, it is. I don't think that's specific to a luxury experience. I think it still is a base expectation of any traveller, and they just expect that we're going to provide a safe, clean, hygienic, safe, secure environment for them to have their experiences in. So whilst it may be perceived by some to be kind of luxury that we've taken the right protocols in our businesses to make sure people are safe and secure, I don't think that's really the expectation. The expectation is that that's the standard in any business, and then the experiences you provide on top of that are what provide the luxury, along with everything else. Within that, there are opportunities, I think, for people to be a bit more creative and entrepreneurial. Silly things, like I went into one of our hotels the other day, and one that was operating at a slightly lower occupancy than normal, and they said that some of the amenities in the room they were personalizing for the guest, because obviously they're not going to leave them in the room because good reason and all the rest of it. So they were actually writing the guest name, dear guest, whatever your name is, welcome, I'm really looking forward to looking after you, have a great time at our hotel, that kind of thing. It takes 2 minutes, but it provides an experience which really blew the guest away. And I think that was something that came out of the need to put hygiene first, and definitely not reusing anything, and everything comes out of the room and all that good stuff. But they had embraced that and created an experience from it.
Absolutely, Tim. Personalization always works. And as for new generations and discussion and the ideas you mentioned, I'm really pleased to see how different they are. Instagrammable is certainly a word, or maybe even a term these days, and a very important decision-making element for younger generations in choosing hotels or coffee shops where they can take photos of a cake and then post it on Instagram and be happy because of that. I really like the point of Alex saying about how these trends are really applicable to not necessarily one generation, but every generation might find something interesting and relevant to them in what is liked by maybe younger or older people, and vice versa. And I think it's important for us, people in the industry, to not box generations or segments or clients into something we got used to, align them alongside our assumptions, but really look out of the box and see what are those new likes and probably some dislikes that people are having these days. And Willemijn, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I was just building building on something a bit on the newer generation, but again, I think it's not only exclusive to that generation. Actually, it's this whole, and I don't know if my co-panelists see the same thing or this trend, is that people tend to be more globally mobile. I think is something that we start to see. Whereas before you used to be based and work out of a city, and especially people, I think, in the younger age group who maybe have no or less family ties. They can just go away to 3 months to Thailand and work from Thailand in the same way as they can work from London or from New York or from any city globally, which is another thing we may want to take into consideration in our hotels in the future, where you get this blending, I think, of work and leisure, or you call it pleasure or workation or whatever terminology we want to use. I think things have become much more fluid and blended in a way, so you can base yourself somewhere where you want to be in the world and work from there during the week, and on the weekend have great experiences and discover and go and travel or do something very different. And this is probably true actually for multiple age groups. and certainly applicable for luxury, because people who are on that spending price point, they can afford to go away and work from anywhere globally. You know, and take the family with them, or bring the family over for certain periods, which may change concepts in the future. And we start to think about it and how we adapt our hotels, and do we need larger spaces, or do we need to integrate work desks back into some kind of resorts? It's a very interesting topic. I don't have all the answers, but it's clearly something food for thought.
I agree, and it's something we've seen too, with demand for our service apartment businesses as well.
Yeah.
They've been more robust throughout the pandemic for perhaps some very obvious reasons, but the demand has accelerated even more recently. And I'll just use Dubai as an example. So many people came here to escape, let's say, European lockdown and the European winter, and to have great experiences, good weather here. And of course, you can base yourself here for 2-3 months. And the government made it very easy to do so with visas and no travel restrictions for a period of time. And we still have the tail end of that into March now, that people were coming for New Year and just extended and extended and extended, basing themselves and working from here, because if you can afford to do so, why not?
Why not?
So yeah, it's been a trend recently.
Absolutely. And picking up on the idea of blending, Willemijn, I could even draw some parallels with the restaurant world, where fusion cuisines are now becoming very, very popular, because people are sort of used to eating and knowing, and they are fully aware and know what the expectations are from, well-known cuisines. But what they like to try is fusion. Best bits of everything, and this will brings out new experiences for them. And I think this is what you were talking about partly when you were talking about blending and taking probably the best out of few elements. All right, wonderful. Now let's move on. Throughout our conversation, all of you were mentioning the importance of experiences and how they are leading trend in customers' preferences these days. Now maybe let's talk a little bit more specifically or more practically. That's what our audience likes to hear. Willemijn, what experiences are the most popular among your clients?
Yeah, it's really, I think, about living the life of a local, I would say. And I believe Tim said something similar before, but this is what we see is very popular. And especially in Intercontinental, we have had this for a very long time, where through the Concierge is really important in that particular brand. And we really try to share some of the insights that a tourist wouldn't necessarily get, whether it's a small little restaurant, or it's going to an art gallery, or to something a bit special, where the guest has the feeling that they experience something which is particular to the location, to the city, to whatever it is, that normally would be accessible mainly through the locals or known by the locals. So we see that those kind of things really have a huge success. I think that's the main one that comes to mind.
Tim, what about Radisson's guests? What experiences do they prefer?
Yeah, I mean, I can build on what Willemijn was saying, because that's exactly the same thing, really. How do you live like a local and get an authentic experience during your travel? Where we created individualized packages in hotels where it's relevant to do so, and in destinations where it's relevant to do so, to try and sort of lift the curtain and show behind the scenes of what it's like to actually be in that place. So rather than going to the tourist hotspot, you're going to some backstreet restaurant that only locals go to. And that experience is what people are looking for. But of course, it's also self-destructive, because if too many people go to that restaurant, it's not for locals anymore, right? So it's an ever-evolving and very dynamic picture.
True.
I think of a hotel in Muscat that in Oman that put on an experience to go and camp on a beach, because on that beach at certain times of the year, turtles come and lay their eggs, and you were woken up in the middle of the night by sand being flicked onto the side of your tent. And that's an experience that absolutely is, you know, breathtaking, and you know, you're probably only going to experience it once or twice in your life if you're very, very lucky. But as soon as our hotel did it, you know, lots of other hotels then started to do that, and then rightly people stepped in and said, well, this is getting too much. So there is a fine line between having an ecological awareness of what you're doing, but also providing unique experiences that stay somehow preserved and unique, and that's becoming an ever decreasing circle of those experiences, I suppose.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I think a lot of what people are looking for is local experiences. And I think, Tim, you hit the nail on the head. There's a very fine line, and one that moves very quickly in a world of internet transparency, between an experience that feels like a discovery and one that, you know, appears to have been discovered by 1,000 other people today. And I think part of the way we solve that is perhaps a bit more granularity around who's doing the recommendations. You know, I'm often fascinated by the sort of elements of Airbnb that are driving success that are beyond the fact that they're renting people's homes and apartments. And certainly one is the power of the host, and the fact that the host is effectively your concierge, and your host's opinions about what's exciting to do in that area are never going to be the same as another host's. And so, you know, I think the more that hospitality brands unleash the power of their people at a very local level, like the concierge, the more you're likely to get, you know, a slightly different version of whatever the popular experience might be. I think the second, you know, big trend that we see is what is broadly referred to as adventure tourism, and so this is a, you know, $500 billion market, growing, you know, double-digit, you know, teen growth rate. And you know, is everything from expedition cruises, you mentioned safaris, Tim, you know, hiking glaciers, you know, hiking the Routeburn Track or the Milford Track in New Zealand. You know, there's a little bit of bucket list item associated with it, but also very much a sense that, you know, people are stretching the bounds. That blends into educational tourism and even voluntourism. It's on to something quite popular among families. And so these are all, you know, viewed by people as things that really enrich their sense of themselves, and are attracting a huge percentage of disposable income spend among those that have sort of glommed onto this space.
Yeah, and then I think it's also about extreme personalization. If you add into the mix, to all the things we said previously, if you then add into like personalization and try to be really specific to your clients and know your customer, know your clients, and I think most of the companies, that's what we're aiming to do. It's to building as much insight and data about our customers as possible, so that we can anticipate literally their needs and their wants. Is almost, I think, luxury is if you don't even need to ask for it. You know what I mean? It's sort of the hotel coming with different propositions or with different ideas, and you can do this in different ways depending in which category of luxury you play in. But trying to anticipate as much as possible their every will and want, and be able to offer that and cater to the customer's needs, I think that also really goes to extreme luxury, right?
It does. And at the same time, I'm struck by that there's a very effective version of personalization and a really bumbling one. And I see a lot of hospitality companies and airlines, travel companies using technology to try to drive personalized interactions. And I find that often fails, largely because people's needs are highly contextual and in the moment. You know, the classic case is a flight attendant going up to a business class passenger at 8 o'clock in the morning and saying, you know, your normal gin and tonic, sir. And, you know, no, it's 8 o'clock in the morning. That's normal at 5 p.m., not at 8. And, you know, that can be an awkward moment. You know, but I was, before COVID, flying on an airline where their use of technology manifested itself in the following way, which is a flight attendant came up to me and said, we flew together last year from city A to city B, and we had a great conversation about X. How is your daughter? You know, and you know, you can contrast those two, right? And the first is slightly annoying and awkward, and the second lights up every emotional neuron in your brain, and becomes a really lasting experience. And I think the other piece, which is interesting, and I'm not sure is ever going to be fully solved by technology, is the best hospitality brands in the luxury space simply watch people. And they're looking at body language, and they're looking for contexts, and they see someone in a lounge chair out by the pool, moving things around and trying to get a little bit of shade, and maybe putting their sleeves down a little bit, and somebody shows up with an umbrella and a tube of sunblock. And technology is never going to get that. That's not personalization in the sense that me, but it's contextualization, and I think that potentially even more powerful.
But this is, I think, is where our industry and where hospitality and hotels have a real opportunity to make the difference, because it's a people industry, right? It's all about the people. And if you unleash the power of the people and the employees in the hotel to actually do this, and you give them the responsibility or just the freedom to go up to the client and say, would you like this or would you like that? And you can do so much through the people and through the human connection. And that's one of the beauties of our industry. And I think I hope it will always remain, because technology and IA can do a lot, but I think this is fundamentally a people's industry, and this is how you'll make the difference.
I fully agree. And that's why I came into this business. Definitely because I'm a people person and I enjoy interacting with people, and that's been one of the tough things about 2020, I guess. But just coming back to a couple of points that were made there, the role of the concierge, I can't resist talking about that a little bit, because it's one of my favorite roles in the hotel. It used to be that a great concierge with the cross keys and so on was somebody who could get you a ticket to the show or the match or a dinner reservation at the restaurant. Now, that isn't the role of the concierge anymore. The role of not primarily. The role of the concierge now is, how do I seek out unique experiences for people? And that's completely shifted in a very short period of time. Certainly in the last 10 years or so, 5 years, the number of requests for get me into that restaurant have gone down like this, because everybody knows what the best restaurant in the town is, and they know they can book a table online before they get there anyway, so it's redundant. What the concierge's value is, and it speaks to talking about the value of people, is creating or finding those unique experiences with their local knowledge. So their role is as relevant, if not more relevant than ever, but it's completely changed. And that's a great example of how, to use your expression, Alex, making those experiences contextual for when the guest requires it and what their mood is on that particular stay, or even on that day or that time during that stay. And that's where hotel companies, and I say all hotel companies, including Radisson, have a lot to learn with how we use the technology that we have and develop the technology that we have, because we're not great at it today, quite frankly. At least I generalize, there are some great examples, but broadly speaking, we don't use technology as effectively as we could, and then allow our people to create experiences or to individualize how we take that technology and make something for the guest.
So true, Tim. And I would also agree that no number of clicks or data can substitute a human touch, because we are humans. As simple as that. And the example I would like to give is not from hospitality per se industry, but still from the industry where they deal with consumers. My son was coming back from football after school. He was coming back home. He was covered in dirt, in mud, because he played football. He was hungry after school, tired, and he popped in Marks and Spencer for some reason. And the lady who was selling bread, gave him, without any requests on his part, gave him warm bread with butter. And it was so touching that when I learned about it, I wasn't there, but when I learned about it, next time I was in Marks and Spencer, I went to thank her for that. And no artificial intelligence would be able to do it, not at the stage of the development it is now. So I went there, I thanked her for being so kind. And of course, now this is my favorite Marks and Spencer to go to. All right, moving on. And now a question that became especially topical during the COVID crisis. Is health the ultimate wealth in 2021? Do you have plans to capitalize on the growing wellness market? Alex, what would be your answer to this?
Sure. I mean, I think first of all, this is again a catalyst. The wellness market has been growing for many years, and I think has become an increasing feature of people's desires for how they spend their time. You know, there's an old cliche that you used to hear a lot, which is people saying that they needed a vacation from their vacation, because vacations used to be times of excess, lots of drinking, lots of eating, you gain a bunch of weight, you don't get enough sleep, and then you need to collapse when you get back. Now, by the way, that is still true for many people, and there are elements of that for many parts of the travel ecosystem. That said, increasingly, people are recognizing that vacations maybe are best when they feel restorative in some way, and there's an element of personal growth. And so integrating wellness into vacation, and by the way, also into work stays, is increasingly important to a large and growing segment. And you see people choosing hotels based on the availability of exercise equipment or the availability of healthy food. Certainly airlines have started to react to this as well. And I don't think that that's going to change anytime soon. And I will always bet on trends that make people happier or make people healthier. And again, as I said before, experiences do make people happier. By the way, I bet against Instagram on that same notion. Instagram factually does not make people happier. It actually makes them miserable over time. And there's a lot of research around that makes them anxious. So, you know, again, I wouldn't overreact there. I think, you know, how much does COVID have to do with this? I'm not sure that much. I think, as Tim suggested, I think the current focus on health and safety around COVID are table stakes in the moment and are designed to remove as much of a fear as is possible. But ultimately, people are going to be happier in their travel if that fear doesn't exist at all. And that will be the case when this is over. And I think we see crisis after crisis when people feel that their personal sense of security is threatened, whether that's a terrorist attack or a natural disaster or war or a pandemic, that once it's over, they go back to their normal behaviors, maybe even with a little bit of snapback. Let's remember that the flu of 1918 ushered in the Roaring '20s. You know, people weren't wearing masks for very much longer. So we'll see elements of this that stick around. I think, you know, to the extent that we've improved cleaning protocols, we'll stick with that. You know, we may see that people are more comfortable wearing masks in Western countries. And that's probably a good thing, particularly if the point to wearing a mask is because you're not feeling well and you're trying to protect others. That's good for society. But I don't think that we're going to be differentiating ourselves based on our COVID cleaning protocols 5 years from now.
Yeah,
I think it's much deeper than that. Actually, I think, yes, the cleaning protocols, this is currently in the moment what we need to do in order to get people back into hotels or make them feel as comfortable as we can. I think there's a fundamental trend which is much, much deeper than surface cleaning. It's all about well-being and how people can preserve as much their health. So it's very much about healthy living, healthy eating, what sort of products we use in the kitchen, in the restaurants. And it goes even further. I think there's a strong developing trend for medical or medical related tourism, which we see, you know, all this anti-aging or trying to prevent aging as much as possible, stay fit for as long as possible. This will really come in more and more into the hospitality segment, and we already see it in our hotels in many cases. Actually, certain markets stronger than others. I think we know we have a lot of Middle Eastern customers coming to Europe to go to the clinic. People from Russia as well. I mean, various. I think it will get more generalized than what we have seen before, but basically having a full-fledged integrated program available in your luxury hotel where you stay for a week or 2 weeks, you do all the checkups, all the medical checkups, then you do all the nice spa add-ons and things, and if you want, you can even do some, you know, lifting techniques or some small, not too invasive surgery. to be able to offer all that on one site in a package, this is what people will want more and more. I think it's a massive market actually that we can tap into.
Yeah, fully agree with what's been said, really. Not too much to add. Yeah, we see the trend of medical tourism increasing. In fact, in certain locations, we see sort of medical cities being developed with hotels around that are catering directly to that market. So it's certainly, it exists and it's growing strongly. And yeah, wellness, and I think the tie in there a little bit with ecotourism as well. If you can have organically sourced or food on the menu and sustainably sourced ingredients, and you can prove that you're doing things in the right way, not just saying you're doing it in the right way, has a real value to it as well, and will only increase in the future.
Yeah, I think that medical tourism hospitality trend has a lot of legs. A friend of mine who's a hotel developer likes to say that hospitals are just hotels with bad food, and it's natural that we'll see some convergence in this space.
Yeah, likely.
Absolutely. They can take the best elements from each other and offer us consumers a new product, and I'm sure it will fly off the shelves. Willemijn and I were talking briefly about that, how our lives today is in a way such a mess because there are so many things that changed and so many things we have to fit in our day because of the lockdown or being in a lockdown. We have to be, employees. We have to be teachers for our children. We have to be cooks for our children, and this schedule goes out of the window. But if after the lockdowns are lifted and we are out there again, if someone offers us a week or two of structured pampering and relaxation and wonderful enriching activities, I personally won't say no. I will very much say yes.
I sign up anytime. Count me in.
Wonderful. This is something to look out for. All right, and now the last but not least question on our initial original agenda is about technology. Maybe very briefly, how do you make it work for the luxury sector? I know we touched upon it a little bit, but maybe just expand slightly.
I can go first if you like. It only really is about how you use the technology to enforce the trends and experiences we've already talked about. Technology is only there as an enabler, not as something on its own right. So it shouldn't be technology providing the experiences, it's just a tool to help provide more personalized experiences to our customers. So it's not about what we develop in technology, it's how we use it. And I don't think we're quite there yet as an industry in terms of capturing the data. But I don't think we put enough value on some of that data that we have right now. And I think we use it sometimes in a somewhat clumsy way. So there's a lot of work that we can do as a sector to improve that. We should know everything about our guests, almost, because they're staying with us. It's not like a supermarket transaction. They're just there for a few hours, and yet because of the loyalty card at Marks and Spencer's, in your example, they actually know quite a lot about you. Whereas we should know loads more because you're staying with us in a regular way, you're dining, you're choosing this, you're choosing that, you're staying for different reasons, and yet we don't really value that data to the level that perhaps we should. And because of that, we've never historically exploited it to provide really amazing, personalized and contextual experiences. That's the future. That's what we're working on really hard now, and I'm sure is going to accelerate massively over the next, or exponentially over the next couple of years.
Tim, I very much agree. And frankly, some time ago, we were looking into doing a webinar on artificial intelligence in hospitality. but it wasn't really welcomed, I have to say, by the industry. Some people were saying that the industry is a little bit archaic for that yet. Some had such reasoning that there is no tailored product for hospitality industry that would work for it, or that would be, not that expensive to be purchased by the hospitality industry. But overall, I so much agree that it's not about data itself. It's about what story that data tells you, and interpreting this information and the knowledge that you accumulated about the client is maybe the next level for us as the industry.
There is a space for AI in hotels and automation in hotels, I believe, but it's automating back office tasks. It's automating low value, repetitive tasks, night audit, whatever it may be, in order to free up time for actual people to spend with our guests and provide those great experiences we've been talking about.
I think that's a critical point. Your first question, Anastasia, when you asked what's changing in luxury, I think another clear change is a move from do it for me to give me options and give me control and give me transparency. And I think particularly the luxury end of the hospitality segment still hangs on to a notion that its people are key to delivering a differentiated experience. And what Tim described is when you can free up people to watch and to interact and to anticipate needs and to be there when you need them, that's fantastic. But I think far too many luxury brands hang on to the notion that check-in is a special experience. Check-in is not something that anyone wants to do. And ask me which is luxury. I arrive at a hotel at 11 o'clock at night. Version 1, I use my mobile key to go straight to my room. Version 2, I wait in a 12-minute queue to be asked by someone how my day has been, and then have them step out from behind the counter so that they can hand the key to me directly with 2 hands. All I'm thinking is you just stole 30 seconds of my life by doing that, and I will never get it back. And so
you forgot even to mention that they explain you all the options you have for breakfast and what time, from what time to what time you can have the breakfast.
Exactly, yeah. And that needs to end, right? We need to find ways to use technology to deal with the simple things immediately in ways that are transparent and easily, so that people can do the things that technology can't. And by the way, I'd also say that when it comes to things like AI, yes, I think there's an opportunity, but there are basics lying right in front of us. Airlines are talking a lot about AI to anticipate which ancillary products people might want to buy. If there's a family of 4 flying from London to Geneva on a Saturday in February, they're more likely to buy extra bags than they are a lounge pass. Why? They're going skiing. I don't know that they're going skiing, but that's a very safe bet. And executing against that bet is going to deliver value to the customer and value to the bottom line. And by the way, to pick on you guys, but in a world where we're all talking about ways to customize and personalize, 4 out of the 5 largest hotel companies in the world do not have the ability to put 2 separate room types on the same record through their websites. Now, by the way, what do families want? Mom and dad in a king-size bed and the kids nearby in twins. And that is a basic need that we're ignoring, partly because we're getting distracted by things like AI. So, there's a little bit of a staircase that I think we as an industry need to go through.
Yeah, interesting points made there. There are some good things coming out of this crisis as well, I think. And the one thing I would say on technology is we have now launched our virtual meeting product, which is really interesting because it's actually a hybrid meeting product where some people can be present in the room, and then we offer with like technology solutions like green screens and things like that for other people in remote locations to be part of the meeting. It works really well, rather than all of us sitting and having, the big face on the screen as we have today. You'll actually see someone standing up, presenting to the room as it would be in a real meeting. And this is fabulous. And I think some of these things will stay because it will allow companies to actually organize meeting with a mix of part people being on site and people from across the other part of the world being able to experience it in the best possible way. And technology will enable that. And the technology is enabling us to do it. Rather than, again, to the eco-responsible part of business and how people think, we will not fly to the other side of Europe anymore for a 2-hour meeting. I think those days are probably gone. We will travel probably for a longer period to squeeze as much as we can into and make the business trip really efficient, but we're not going to sit on a plane, go for a 2-hour meeting and come back. So there's a lot of things that technology can enable that will change the consumer behavior. And especially on this meeting side, I think there's a lot of really interesting things that will stay and that have come out of what we're currently living, right? The current crisis we're living, that otherwise may have come 5-10 years down the line, but they're here now and we're using it today.
Thank you for very comprehensive answers on this question as well. Well, now we have time to answer some questions from the audience, and we'll start with the most popular ones. Among them is a question that is asked literally at all our events, and one we would love to know the answer to. When will the industry return to the pre-COVID levels?
I'm happy to jump in on that one, given that I get asked it every day, I suppose, and we've got a fair amount of research energy focused on it. First of all, the only thing I will promise about this is that I'll be wrong. If you'd asked me in May when we'd see the first signs of real recovery, I would have said December, and certainly we did not. But look, I think all signs are pointing towards 2019 traffic levels if we're looking at the airline industry, and of course that flows through to hospitality by early 2024. While there are a range of views on when COVID will be behind us, those views range from the second quarter of next year through let's say on the outside the second quarter of next year. Every indication we see is that as soon as COVID is behind us, travel will pick up again the economic curve. And the economic damage from COVID, while extreme, has largely been well dealt with. The stimulus packages around the world have been timely and relatively effective. Broadly speaking, the economic damage from COVID is about 1/3 the damage that we saw in the global financial crisis. The global stimulus is almost 7 times. And so while there are questions about how our kids and grandkids pay for that, and certainly we're likely to see inflation as a necessary side effect, the bottom line is that the world's economies are doing reasonably well. Corporate balance sheets are strong. And if we divide the world between people that still have jobs and people that don't, and certainly unemployment levels are rising in many parts of the world, particularly in the service sector, personal savings among people that still have jobs are at an all-time high because they haven't had anything to spend their money on. So there's a lot of latent demand out there for travel, and as soon as this is behind us, it will come back, and will come back relatively quickly. And I think the only reason we won't likely see traffic come back sooner is that, particularly in the airline industry, you can't have more passengers than you have seats. And capacity decisions have long lead times. And so airlines are mostly planning on assumptions of a late 2023, early 2024 recovery. And if they see demand coming back earlier, they'll be able to bring that forward a quarter or two, but not much more than that, simply because it takes time to get airplanes out of storage and bring pilots back from furlough and get all of the necessary pieces in place to be able to operate.
Yeah, we take a very similar view. It's perhaps slightly more bullish towards the sort of second half of 2023, that kind of thing, but broadly the same. But the one thing I really 100% agree with is whatever we say today will prove to be absolutely wrong. We sadly don't have a crystal ball or a time machine, so it's impossible to really know. There's no real historical precedent for the situation we find ourselves in. So we're all feeling in the dark a little bit, but based on what we know today and some pretty sensible assumptions, that seems like a fairly sensible place to pitch it. I think what will happen is there'll be different speeds of how we get there, based on different geographies and different demand cycles. Broadly, yeah, 2019 new normal version will be towards the end of 2023, something like that.
Willemijn, would you like to add anything?
Well, not particularly. I don't pretend to have a crystal ball, so probably not much to add on there, other than the fact that I think in part people will make up for the travel they have not been able to do in 2020. So there's clearly a lot of pent-up demand out there. And you already see it if you look at the data from internet searches and travel destination searches, even if people don't book and it doesn't convert into bookings, we probably, all of us, spent a large part of our free time looking at what our next destination will be. And we're dreaming and thinking and planning. And as soon as the travel restrictions will lift in the different parts of the world, I think that will convert into actual bookings. We did a little survey in February where we asked people about their travel expectations, and 1 out of 5, so 20%, actually said that they expect to go on more trips in 2021 to make up for what they have not been able to do in 2020. So I think as soon as restrictions lift in different countries, we should start to see quite a significant boom. It's hard to predict when and how and where it will happen, but we need to get ourselves ready to gear up and to, also it brings a lot of operational considerations. We're getting ourselves geared up to open hotels again. We've closed them, we opened them, we reclosed, we reopened. I think we got really good at it over the course of the last year. Bring people back from furlough, get back into, the whole routine of building up to a full recovery. Is what we're currently getting ready for. But the other thing I would maybe say from an investor perspective, we're going to be dealing with development and dealing with investors. The sentiment towards this industry has remained very, very positive all throughout. If I look at our deals, actually, we have lost very few. A lot have been delayed for COVID-related reasons, people not being able to take the decision, financing not being able to readily available, but we have lost quite few because the sentiment on the medium and long term from the investment community towards hospitality and hotels has remained very, very strong and very positive.
So true, William. And actually, I even heard such a term as travel revenge, describing what you just mentioned. People want to travel, and they certainly want to make up for all the lost opportunities in respect of, ability to go out and enjoy themselves out there. As for the investment sentiment, at our other webinar, I remember one of our panelists said that actually the crisis created a few opportunities for purchasing new venues, new properties, because the prices went down. And if some hotel chains couldn't before acquire properties in very sought after locations, now they could, and those who could afford it, they did acquire a thing or two. So as usual, crisis is an opportunity as well. Now getting back to the questions that our attendees asked, here is another one, and it relates a little bit to the question of demand, but in a slightly different way. And it was voted the most popular here. Several trend reports say that guests are expected to become more demanding post-COVID. And while there is a huge pent-up demand to travel, hotels and resorts have had to cut down a lot on costs to survive the crisis and may have challenges ramping up. What are your thoughts on this? Do you think guests will be more demanding, expecting even higher value for money than before?
Well, I think that's another catalyst that maybe you could ascribe to COVID-19. I don't think it's a particularly new trend. Guest expectations have been increasing consistently forever, really. I mean, it was once upon a time, it was fantastic to have tea and coffee making facilities and an ironing board in your room, whereas that's laughable now. Once upon a time, it was groundbreaking to be able to offer fast Wi-Fi, and that is, that's just an expectation in the same way that you have water in a hotel. Wi-Fi is probably even more important than having water in a hotel these days. So the expectation levels are yes, they are increasing. The challenge for operators is more around how do we address those expectations in a sustainable way. And we've talked a lot about guest expectations in terms of personalization and so on. And that's where the focus needs to be. How do we meet those expectations by personalizing guest stay and creating memorable experiences for them? And that doesn't necessarily have to cost more or cost the earth, or necessarily mean you have to have more people than you had before. It's about how you deploy those people and what freedom you give them and what entrepreneurial spirit you can instill in them. So yes, it's a challenge for our industry, but it's always been there. And I think it's one that we'll address in the way that we have with previous challenges, I guess.
I'm not sure. I'd probably point to two separate issues. I think one is whether people will be more demanding, and I could make the case, and again, I'm guessing here, that for a period of time, people may be less demanding. We've certainly seen that over the course of the last few months. Remember that the entire world's population has gone through the same crisis together. And, save the, battles between the mask wearers and the non-mask wearers in supermarkets, this shared experience leads to a certain amount of humanity. And certainly, I've seen in my travels, and I've been traveling a fair bit, an increased sense of camaraderie between passengers and flight attendants and hotel guests and hotel staff, along the lines of we're all in this together. And hopefully some of that may remain. And in fact, there have been some areas where we've dropped service levels and discovered that guests are perfectly fine with it. So an example would be, opt-in room cleaning and opt-in turn-down service, where we discover that actually some people don't want their privacy invaded twice a day on a regular basis and would like to be able to control that. So I don't think that it's necessarily the case that people are going to come back looking to make up for everything that they've lost in the last couple of years. I do think that we are likely to disappoint guests over the course of the next year. Why? Because we brought down capacity after demand dropped off. The opposite is going to happen. I was in a hotel in Miami a couple of weeks ago, and it had 90% occupancy, and it was very clearly staffed for 50. And that's an almost inevitable planning outcome. And that's something to watch very carefully, because we have, as an industry, have the potential to really annoy our travelers at precisely the moment when we need them to love us.
Yeah, I think that's a good call out. It will be very hard to predict how quickly the travel will come back, and it may be quite surprising. I think we may see some very surprising, spikes, and how important it is to monitor on a day-by-day basis and the future booking patterns, because it will mean we need to bring people back very quickly to our hotels. People that have been on furlough for some time, they need to get back into the routine as well. And we try to anticipate as much as we can to do all that. The other thing maybe is we see a shift in, we may drop certain services, and you mentioned opt-in, opt-out. We also scrutinize quite heavily on our brand standards, in order to save costs for owners. Is it really useful to have all these little things in the room? Do you need 2 notepads and 2 pens? And that actually has been removed, because we had to remove quite a lot of things for sanitary reasons. But I think there's quite a lot of things that may stay afterwards, where you will really scrutinize, is that useful? Is that what guests want? Or do they want something else? So I think we'll see probably a shift from, some of those brand standards which have been there forever, that we have been questioning as to, are they really useful? Another good example, I think, is all the small in-bathroom amenities, think they will just go out of the window and will go to bulk amenities, including in luxury. And luxury customers are absolutely fine with that because they understand why we do it. It's actually for the environment and it's absolutely fine. So I think we'll make cost saving on certain items that will allow us to probably spend more on actually investing in our people, being with the guests, spending time where it's most impactful. I think that's what will happen.
Thank you, Willemijn. The next question that we were asked by the attendees today is, in the post-COVID period, which do you think would be beneficial for travel and hospitality business in terms of recovery speed and establishing consumer confidence? A, aggressive pricing to compensate lost revenue. B, rather more attractive pricing to stimulate demand. And C, pricing will not play a key role. I know at our other webinars, pricing was a very hot topic. So what will be your take on that?
I might say, go ahead.
Go ahead. No,
I was going to save the two of you
from
your antitrust lawyers by answering on your behalf.
No, I don't think pricing is necessarily the driver. If there's no demand, there's no demand, right? At the moment, you can drop the prices as low as you want. You're not going to fill the city of Amsterdam with people because they just can't travel or they don't want to travel. So dropping the price is probably the last thing we should do. We have to be very careful with aggressive pricing because we've seen it in other crises. It will take a very long time to bring actually those rates back up. And as an industry, I think we should just be very careful. I don't think pricing is the driver. Beneficial for travel, I think it's more around flexibility. In addition to obviously the cleanliness and providing a great breakfast and all those things, it's the flexibility, and providing flexibility to people is exactly what we have done in the last year and will continue to do so. Is, offer flexible bookings, cancellation policies, rebooking in a different time frame, or simply canceling your booking and getting your money back. I think rather than pricing, for me, it's flexibility.
Fully agree. Discounting does not create demand. It's a very well proven fact. Just because a hotel drops its rates by 20%, someone on the other side of the world doesn't say, let's go there then, because it's 20% cheaper. So it's more about sustainability of pricing and the fences around those prices, as we're just talking about, what the cancellation policy / prepayment, whatever. That's much more how I think things will play out, but not discounting.
I certainly agree that that's the right answer. In fact, we've seen in general over time an improvement in recovery speeds from pricing due to hotels taking exactly the strategy. When you use price as a mechanism to try to stimulate demand that isn't there, typically we see that price takes 36 months longer than demand to recover. And that's partly due to revenue management systems doing what they naturally do, which is they react to last year and try to make incremental improvements, so it takes time. And second, when we adjust the reference price in the mind of travelers, it takes a while to stretch it back. And so if you've been used to the idea that you get access to a 5-star luxury hotel in a major city for $150 a night, all of a sudden when you're being told it's $250, it sounds very expensive. And your personal elasticity is adjusted accordingly.
Fully agree, Alex. And here is another interesting question. Probably the statement that hospitality industry suffered the most as a result of the coronavirus is the most frequent one, and we can hear it every day in the news and industry analytics. But here is a question that turns it a little bit around. Can hotels disrupt the co-working industries? Can hotels disrupt something else? What do you think?
I'm happy to take a lead on that. I think yes. I think that the hotel industry today defines itself as a seller of rooms and meeting space, and to some extent food and beverage. And that means that their ability to use a building or a plot of land, is limited to a great extent by the range of brand concepts that they have in their portfolio. And so if you're stuck with a very large building and, the answer is that that building would require 450 rooms to fill it out and the market can't bear 450 rooms, we move on, or we take a very big risk. And I think that there's room to think differently about our role, and particularly in a world where companies like IAG and Radisson are, to a great extent, their customers are not only people who sleep in beds, but they're real estate developers. That by offering a broader range of menu items, if you will, for how to use a plot of land or how to use a building, that perhaps go beyond rooms, I think is quite interesting. And of course, we already see some of that mixed use development where the upper floors of a hotel may be condos that are sold and leased back. You might see a range of different retail concepts leased out to spas and F&B, but I think that there's more there, and whether that's gyms or co-working space, I think there's a lot of opportunity to think differently about the value that we add to real estate developers and how we use buildings, and I think that will lead to a more resilient business over time that's less exposed to shocks like this.
Yeah, I agree. Hotels, particularly in my part of the world, they can have quite a bit of dead space. And what COVID-19 has done is perhaps made us relook at how we use some of those spaces. And the WeWork model, which I guess is what this question is about, co-working spaces, is something that we're actively involved with in this part of the world, how we deploy those spaces in a more productive way. And that's one solution. It's not the only one. Using bedrooms for kind of workspaces as well is something we've been doing over the pandemic through necessity as much as anything else, and having the technology to do so. So yes, it's a trend that I think will accelerate. And you're quite right, Alex. It used to be that you'd just look at the space and have as many restaurants and rooms as you possibly can, and now I'm sure Willemijn's doing the same. We're talking to hotel developers and saying, well, hang on a minute, let's put some apartments in here that we can, service apartments, that we can diversify the market we can appeal to with this long stay component. Let's not have quite as much food and beverage space. Yes, there should be some restaurants and we can focus on that, but what else do we do with this space here? And that could be co-working, it could be retail, it could be many, many different uses. But we're much more involved in that now than we ever have been.
And I think the hotel within those mixed use schemes are really the locomotive, as we say, or the catalyst, because it sort of offers a central point, a lively point. We can offer a lot of services, including to those other uses. Mixed use is something that we have seen for quite some time, becoming more and more attractive. But even the co-working, integrating it into our hotels, I think, Tim, that is what you were referring to, right? Is we are in a really good position as hoteliers to actually offer this, because we may have the space, we have the capabilities to offer actually F&B and catering, we know how to welcome guests, so it's just facilitating that. Something which was already happening a lot in our hotels. If you look at hotel lobbies, haven't they always been used for small meetings? And isn't this one of the best meeting places to do small 2-3 people meetings, and you get a cup of coffee? And actually people sitting there the whole day long is not an uncommon sight. So it's maybe just formalizing it or giving it a little tweak or branding or marketing it a little bit differently or a little bit more, because it was already happening naturally. Co-working in our hotels was happening already.
So true, Willemijn. Actually, from my own experience of someone who ran conferences for a very long time, I can confirm that one of the favorite places for delegates in any country we ran our events was the lobby. And this is where they really enjoyed it. They felt more comfortable even than in a closed office space, so to say, because there is music, there are people around. It sort of relaxes it, and sometimes it's good for even business meetings and for exchanging opinions or experiences with your customers, sometimes partners, colleagues, in a more relaxed way. So absolutely, it's just about how you position it, as always. We are coming to the end of our webinar today. I guess the main overarching conclusion we could make is that the exclusivity of luxury is timeless, but its product application is what should be timely, relevant, and adapting to the changes that society is going through. I would like to thank our panelists for their fantastic input into this webinar. I think the knowledge gap that I was referring to in my opening remarks has been very much bridged with the help of Willemijn, Tim, and Alex. Thank you for your time and experience.
Thank you. Thank you all. Good to see you. Travel well.
Thank you for inviting us. It was a pleasure to participate along with my co-panelists. So thank you again, Anastasia, for facilitating, inviting us, and having this webinar. It was a pleasure.
Likewise, a real pleasure. Thank you very much, everybody. It's been great to have this discussion.
Cheers.
The pleasure was absolutely ours. And of course, I would like to thank our audience for being here with us and choosing us as their information resource. I'm wishing you all the best, and I'm looking forward to seeing you again at our future events.